Hey all, Kevin here, back with part two in the Introduction to Edible and Medicinal Plant series. And let's just go ahead and jump right in. I'll be honest with you, this is the third time I've recorded this because it doesn't want to save for some reason. What we're going to talk about today is types of plants as it pertains to identification. And we're going to get into plant guides in probably the next episode a little bit. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. What I want you to remember is a lot of the terms we use, they vary based on whether we're talking about botanically or culinarily or so on and so forth, the type of plants we're talking about. So just keep that in mind. You may see some terms presented in your plant guides in a way that I'm talking about differently today. First of all, let's talk about woody plants versus herbaceous plants. Finish off the coffee. Woody plants are those plants that the structure remains at the end of their annual growing cycle. You want to think about trees and shrubs and bushes, some types of vines, things like that. Uh, Woody plants, they'll be a little bit different when we start talking about herbal preparations later in the series. Uh, there are some preparations that you do differently with woody plants than you do herbaceous plants. Herbaceous plants, think about anything that dies all the way back to the ground at the end of the growing season. As far as your garden plants and things like that go, think of your lettuces and carrots and things like that. In the wild, you want to think about pretty much all of the plants that you see. There are prairie and woodland plants, uh, mullein and wild carrot and so on and so forth. They die back, and a lot of them leave a root structure that they work with the next year, but a lot of them also come up with seed, so on and so forth. So woody plants, structure remains. Herbaceous plants dies back to the end of the by English dies back to the ground at the end of its growing season. Let's talk about deciduous versus evergreen trees, or plants or bushes, so on and so forth. Uh, a deciduous tree or so and so or plant is something that drops all of its leaves at the end of its growing season or sometime during its life cycle. An evergreen plant is something that uh, green leaves remain on the plant all throughout the year. Think white pine and things like that. A lot of your spruces and yews and things like that. Now, that's not saying there are not, uh, don't confuse these with conifers, which are also most of the time evergreen. But if you want to think about something like bald cypress is a conifer, but it loses all of its leaves at at the end of the spring and summer growing season. Uh, now, a lot of people confuse conifers and evergreens. They're not the same thing. Conifers are things that produce a cone, and they're not all evergreen. So, with that being said, let's move on to simple leaves versus compound leaves. This is a little bit more in depth to try to differentiate between those. As far as a simple leaf goes, you want to think of something like oak or sweet gum or sycamore, things like that. And this has to do with how the leaf structure grows. A simple leaf has a stem or is almost stemless and attaches directly to a branch. And we can get into that, but it's all plant science and things like that. We don't need to get into at this level. A compound leaf is a stem with a whole bunch of little leaflets attached, and I want you to think about something like walnut or hawthorn or locust, something along those lines. And that whole structure, that stem and all those tiny little leaflets, uh, are actually the leaf. Okay, so don't confuse leaflets with leaves. When we're talking about herbaceous plants and to a degree some woody plants, but we're just going to ignore that woody plant thing for the purposes of the introduction. Uh, So we basically have perennials, biennials, and annual plants as far as herbaceous plants goes. A perennial plant is any plant that's got a life cycle longer than 2 years. And some plants are perennial in some environments and annual in other environments. Let's think about tomatoes. Tomatoes are native to South America, and in that environment, they're generally a perennial plant because they'll last until you either destroy them or some cold snap comes through and kills them all the way back to the ground. But it almost happens never in their native environment. But tomatoes are an annual in the United States, unless of course you're growing them in a greenhouse. A biennial plant is something that completes its its life cycle over 2 years. I want you to think about something like a mullein plant. Mullein, in its first year of life, it grows from seeds from last year, and the first year it produces a very low-growing rosette of leaves. And the second year of its life, that first year is dedicated to growing a big enough root structure and storing enough energy and nutrients and so on and so forth in that root structure to support growing the leaf stalk the second year of its life. Second year of its life, it shoots up that big tall leaf stalk that in the beginning of the year it's a yellow, got those pretty showy yellow flowers all over it. And then the later part of that second year, those flowers go away and that stalk produces seed. So, first year of its life, it produces enough energy to grow the flowers in the seed stalk in its second year of life. At the end of its second year of life, it drops seeds to start the cycle all over again for next year's crop. An annual plant is something that completes its entire life cycle over one growing season or 1 year. And a lot of plants are this way. They sprout from seed or from some other reproduction body at the beginning of the year. Then they go through their growing of vegetation, and that vegetation is so they can affect photosynthesis and have enough energy to produce flowers and then seeds. And then that whole life cycle is over, and next year's plants come up from seeds from this year's plants. And that's really all we're going to talk about today. I think that's probably enough to digest in part 2. So we will be back with you in part 3. And thanks for watching. Thanks for your views and thanks for your support. And see y'all in the woods, maybe, or alongside the road gathering plants. We never know.